Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily's. We're calling our readings through the 1,775 poems of the Johnson edition of the complete poems of Emily Dickinson. We turn now to poem 4, On This Wondrous Sea. And here, right away, we're going to find ourselves now in the territory that will be most comfortable for us. I say most comfortable, obviously I'm speaking ironically when I'm talking about Emily Dickinson, but this will be the predictable kind of form of poems that we'll be looking at now for the rest of our collection. Now my assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist, and that you are especially going to have already been conversant with our introductory set of comments in that lecture, and as well poems 1 through 3. We just finished with Sic Transit. Now, the background here is quite fascinating because a lot of this poem has to do with Emily's pal, Susan Gilbert. In March of 1853, Emily will send this poem to her pal in Baltimore, and the words with the poem are actually the, can we call it a command? Write, comrade, write, W-R-I-T-E, exclamation point after both of the writes. And then her signature, Emily, which by the way is spelled E-M-I-L-I-E at the end of the letter. 105 is the letter. Now, just to give you a little bit of background on Gilbert, and there's a whole lot that's been read and studied about Gilbert. She's in Amherst in 1850. They have this very close connection. Some have called it homoerotic. And in February of 1852, actually, these are the words that she wrote to who she called Susie. She says, quote, I would nestle close to your warm heart and never hear the wind blow or the storm beat again. Thank you for loving me, darling. Dearer you cannot be, for I love you so already that it almost breaks my heart. Perhaps I can love you anew every day of my life, every morning and evening. Letter 74. Now, it's interesting that apparently Gilbert didn't do a lot of writing back in regards to this, these letters, and it's interesting to try to figure out what write, comrade, write could mean. For example, it could mean write me letters back. It could also obviously mean, come on, you got to participate in this poetic venture with me. The idea that this poem will begin the first of a number of what later will be called, and what Emily herself would call her flood subject. You may want to write that down. We're going to come back to it. The idea of life after death. In other words, what happens post-mortality is always interesting. Here we're going to have a dialogue of a kind that I find kind of fascinating. Where we're going to have, first of all, the seeker. Now, hey, we got to be very careful here. Let's say this out loud. Just because these poems are deeply personal in their tone, and just because Emily Dickinson is this, well, some will call her a recluse, some will call her tied, put away from there, some monastic, or however you want to think of her. Emily is nun, living away cloistered life. Whatever that is, it's going to be very easy for us to read almost all of her poems as this is Emily's voice. But we got to be careful about that because remember, poets can sometimes use first-person pronoun and not at all be speaking about themselves. And I think Emily is sometimes doing that. So I'm going to argue that necessarily this isn't just Emily, but maybe let's call it the seeker asking the question. And then we're going to have a response voice in the second stanza, the pilot. Some have identified this as God. I like to identify it more as maybe the possibility of a muse or inspiration itself. Let's just enjoy the poem. And this, because these poems are short, hurrah, we can actually read them and enjoy the just beautiful language and rhythm and cadences of her poetry. On this wondrous sea, sailing silently, ho, pilot, ho! Knowest thou the shore where no breakers roar, where the storm is o'er? In the peaceful west, many the sails at rest, the anchor's fast, thither I pilot thee. Land ho, eternity, ashore at last. Now for those of you that are saying, whoa, did Tennyson basically lift this kind of thing in his Crossing the Bar of 1889, a poem that will, be written a number of years later? Well, he couldn't have had access probably to any set of lines like this, but we do definitely see the convergence, no question. Let's begin with that use of the word wondrous. I've said this to you, that Dickinson will often display a power of word choice that's just beyond almost any other poet, although we did play this game. I know we played this game in our study of Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Notice the power of the word wondrous. And just think about what we'll be enjoying when we get to poem 88. As by the dead we love to sit, becomes so wondrous dear. As for the lost we grapple, though all the rest are here. Her use of the word wondrous makes sense to me for a number of reasons, because Emily herself constantly reminds us of the power of curiosity. And you guys, if there's anything I can say to you right now, early on in our study of Emily, it is this. She reminds us that there's no way swinging at the park is ever boring to a 3-year-old. No. They enjoy the experience. They don't have to have a reason why. And I would say our study of Emily can be captured in this one word, wondrous. Now for Emily, of course, it's an interesting question. Okay, I get this. I live, I die, I go on this journey, I sail my boat, but then what? Where am I headed, and what will it be like? Notice on this wondrous sea, sailing silently. Again, think about the use of words silent there in poem 3 with Columbus. Of course, we're playing a similar kind of idea of sailing as it relates to Walt Whitman and Passage to India. And then this ho, pilot, ho. Now, when we see the word pilot, we're going to come back to it when we meet poem 477. So let's go there for just a second. And notice the use of pilot here. No man can compass a despair as round a goalless road. No faster than a mile at once the traveler proceed. Unconscious of the width and conscious that the sun be setting on his progress so accurate. The one estimating pain, whose own has just begun, his ignorance, the angel that pilot him along. Now, Emily Dickinson's relationship to religion and to church is one that we will come back to again and again. She once said, I can't pray, so I sing. And I think it's interesting here that this word pilot can be understood as deity. It can be understood as, the idea of, the guide. I mean, we think about the power, for example, of what we see in the Bhagavad Gita, right, as we have that exchange between Krishna and Arjuna, and we've talked about that as well at Learn Strong. Notice here, on this wondrous sea, sailing silently, ho, pilot, ho, and then now speaking directly to that pilot who will respond in a moment. Knowest thou the shore? Again, we're back, of course, to epistemology and the question of knowledge. Knowest thou the shore, where no breakers roar, where the storm is o'er? Notice this repetition, the rhythm and the repetition, it's beautiful. And of course, by 1941, T.S. Eliot is playing a similar game in Dry Salvages, isn't he, right? You can go and run that set of lectures to ground at learnstrong.net if you're unfamiliar with those brilliant lines. Now, the response comes in the second part of this poem, but notice there's no quotation marks, and this is going to be typical of Emily. We've seen already the use of the dash, the random, it seems at times, use of the dash, but notice here, in the peaceful West, pay attention to directionality in Emily's poetry. Always it's going to matter. Here, notice we're moving from east to west. In the peaceful West, many the sails at rest. Of course, the idea that all those lives that have come before. A contemporary, right, of hers, Longfellow, will say, lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime in departing, leave behind us footprints on the sands of time, psalm of life, right? Many the sails at rest, the anchors fast. In other words, they've done their journey, they've done their sailing, right? Thither, now notice, I pilot thee. Land ho, eternity, ashore at last. Now, there seems to be a very interesting observation that's being made here. At the conclusion of the journey, there will be rest, there will be peace, which is fascinating because at the opening of the poem, notice, we're sailing silently. So, for Emily, the hope is that the afterlife will have some of the same things that the pre-afterlife has, right? And immediately, obviously, we start thinking at 3A about Plato's Phaedo. We've given full lectures on it. There is Socrates sitting next to his hemlock shake. Of course, all of his disciples are crying and weeping because he's about to drink this poison that will take his life, and he's giddy with excitement. Because he's going on what? Well, he talks about a journey, a sailing, right? A leaving, a departure. And if you get ready to go on an exciting adventure, you don't sit at the airport and weep, hopefully. You're rather excited, yes? And so we have the same game being played here. What are we going to do with a poem like this at 2A? Well, I think our argument actually is something akin to thinking about inspiration for artists. Because I think it is a truism that everyone wonders, okay, you said that we swing at the part, and then we have to go bye-bye to the van. And they were teaching us this at a very young age, and we haven't met any 200-year-old people. So it is true that, I only get to swing at the part for a short period of time. What will that be like afterwards? I think there's definitely a reading of that here. But I think there's a secondary reading here that's equally as powerful, and that is Emily as artist. Emily as creator, Emily as poet, who is wondering as well about the future and the value. When will I finally find rest? And always there's some weariness for artists about the sailing. And I sense that in this poem as well. I mean, you guys can obviously make up your own mind about how you read this poem. At 2B, I love the dialogue format. Emily Dickinson was very influenced by the Brownings, and of course, Daddy Browning, Robert Browning, wrote those amazing, what do we call them? Those not dialogues, but monologues. And yet, we've given a lot of lectures at Learn Strong on those poems. And yet I think there's always Plato, it seems, standing behind so much of what Emily Dickinson is doing in terms of the dialogue. And so notice here we have this dialogue format. We're going to see it a bunch of times again. At 3A, well, I mentioned Tennyson's Crossing the Bar, T.S. Eliot's Dry Salvages. Whitman's Passage to India comes to mind of 1870. This poem is 1853. So think about how Emily's playing the game of sailing much earlier than the publishing of Passage to India. Think about Melville's Moby Dick of 1851, and it's very possible that because 1851 comes a couple of years earlier, that there is this idea of sailing and the dangers that are equated, and then finally making it back to harbor and the like. Finally, at 3B, I can just help you to maybe grab a hold of this poem by asking, what was a time that you felt lost at sea? I mean, go back to the Exeter book poems of the Wanderer and the Seafarer, as I've given full lectures at Learn Strong on that one, where you have this amazing Anglo-Saxon warrior out in the middle of the sea, and he talks about how terrible it is, and how he longs to be back home, but the moment that he gets back home, he's ready to go out again on the boat. What was a time that you felt lost at sea, and you longed to be able to come back home? And then also, who is your pilot when you are lost at sea? Or what serves as your muse if you are creative, and I hope all of you are? What is the source of your inspiration, maybe is another way to say it. Well, we're 4 poems in, guys. Let's keep going. We'll journey on, sail on. Can I say it that way? To poem 5. Thank you.